The Space Force Association's mission is to achieve superior national space power. Working with industry partners to examine what's in the art of the possible for future capabilities. The Space Force Association provides an opportunity to research, inform, and advocate for a strong Space Force. Show your support by signing up today at ussfa.org.
There are 8 billion humans on Earth. The Space Force Association is bringing over 2,000 of them together, all with the common goal of preserving and protecting our thriving space domain. The most critical space power challenges will be addressed. This is your invitation to be part of the solution. Attend the Space Power Conference and help secure our nation's legacy in the stars.
Good morning, everybody. We are fortunate at SFA to have Lieutenant General DeAnna Burt from the U.S. Space Force, Chief of Operations for the U.S. Space Force, talk to us today. And this is a follow-up interview. We did this, gosh, I don't even remember. It's been a little while. I think you were at Vandenberg, General Burt, the last time we did this. But it's great to have you, so thanks for doing this.
Absolutely, it's great to be here with SFA.
Well, let's jump right into it if you're okay.
Absolutely.
General Burt, Spice as I call you, hopefully you don't mind that. Some of our viewers probably may or may not know this, but you and I have known each other, worked with each other for many years. Aside from our time at weapons school together, we have some good war stories probably from when we were at the 460 Space Wing at Buckley Air Force Base. You know, and back then, I think we started to see the threat changing quite a bit, considerably, just from a strategic missile warning perspective, but also in other areas. And I was just wondering, can you describe some of the changes you've seen in the domain and emerging threats as you've observed this throughout your career?
Oh, agreed, Dan. I think from our time together, we were seeing things continue to grow, and they have since we last saw each other in command in 2013. It's incredible to see how the domain has continued to be contested and congested. And when we talk about congestion, I think just the number of satellites that are on orbit today due to proliferated constellations, the amount of debris that's on orbit, both from the 2007 Chinese ASAT kinetic test, as well as the most recent 2021 Russian kinetic test, the pieces of that debris and what we have on orbit. We have 2 space stations on orbit now that have souls aboard, both the U.S. or the International Space Station, as well as the taikonauts on the Chinese space station. So a lot of more international travel happening in space from a perspective of just more humans in the domain. And that makes it more difficult to make sure that we're protecting those human lives. But at the same time, just how does that affect commerce and the prosperity in the domain? So that congestion does concern us, and how we're going to deal with that moving forward, because it doesn't look like it's getting any less congested. From a contested perspective, the threat continues to grow. Why the service was stood up was to address that threat. We've seen both our pacing challenge with China as well as our acute threat with Russia both make advances since you and I worked together. The Chinese in particular have had 62 launches last year, which is a new record for them, and continue to grow. We've seen them have grapplers on orbit. They talk about debris removal. We saw them move a defunct Beidou satellite out of geosynchronous orbit and into supersynchronous, so removed a satellite from orbit. That would concern us. Could they do that to one of our assets? So very concerning. We've seen the ASAT they did in 2007, but they've continued to do testing, and we believe they are on path to create an ASAT that could reach geosynchronous orbit, so some of our most highly valued assets in that domain as well. On the acute side with Russia, as we know, we grew up with Russia in the Cold War days, and they have been experienced space operators. Now, they've experienced quite a bit of shortfalls due to the sanctions that have been put on them due to the act of war they've created with Ukraine. But we have seen them continue to accelerate. They have now an air-launched ASAT capability, the Burevestnik, that they have also brought online. And as I said, they did their kinetic test in 2021. We know both have the capability from a ground-based perspective, from jammers, lasers, and again, ground-based ASAT capabilities. So both very well capable of attacking our interests in space and our partners. And so our goal here is to how do we bridge to getting to capabilities that are resilient and our ability to fight through those threats, being able to recognize them, do threat-informed training, and continue to operate and provide the capabilities that the Joint Force depends on. And when required, remove those capabilities that allow space-enabled attacks on the Joint Force. So how do we, from the enemy side? So we're working through that as a service. We come up on our 4th birthday this year. But we are continued to see things continue to grow and robust out, and it's not getting better. It's actually getting more difficult to work in the domain. But our goal is to continue to thrive and achieve through that.
Wow, scary and exciting times, but like you said, troubling and scary at times as well. So I'm assuming that the threat that you described had something to do perhaps with the Space Force changing its mission statement recently. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
No, absolutely. So as we do a lot of things in the Space Force, we're concerned and want to make sure that everyone has a voice in the process. So even with our mission statement, General Saltzman was very interested in hearing from the field. So we had over 135 different elements report in, whether they be individuals, and so think military, civilian, both officer and enlisted, guardians providing input of what they thought our mission statement should be, and from inputs from all the field commands, as well as particular units who sat and had days where they thought about what our mission statement should be. And I think the CSO was very much looking for a mission statement that was easy to put out and remember, and that was clear and articulate, as all the services have, of a statement that clearly articulates what we do as a service. And so I think the words matter. So I'll break it down. Secure, that is our purpose for being. How do we secure the domain for our nation's interests, and focusing on both what happens in space, the productivity, the commercial capabilities, all the things and prosperity that the domain brings us. How do we secure that for our nation's interests? And then our standard, as we've seen in many of our statements and historical statements over the year, in, from, and to space. So in the domain itself, capabilities being provided from space to the Joint Force, and then getting those capabilities to space. We talk about launch and how resiliently we can get things up on into orbit quickly. So I think it clearly captures, it's very clear and concise, and puts together all the elements I think the CSO wanted. And that we needed as a service, frankly, to be able to communicate with our joint partners on what we bring to the fight.
Well, I texted him some inputs. I don't think he used a single word of what I sent him. So obviously it worked out pretty well.
Don't feel bad. He did use anybody.
No, well, it's great. The feedback I'm getting from folks is that they like it. They like the change. So, I have had a chance to talk to General Saltzman a little on this next question, but only in a one-on-one setting. And I'm wondering, can you educate our audience on why the Space Force is standing up? And I think this is related to everything that we've talked about so far, but why it's standing up service components and the role they'll play?
Yeah, absolutely. And understand standing up service components is good for both the Joint Force and for the Space Force. This is about normalizing the service and how we foundationally present forces to the Joint Force. It gives us an ability to provide a singular space voice to every combatant commander who is focused clearly all the time on that combatant commander's interests. And like every other service has service components, again, it's just part of being normalized as a service. As you know, we've moved out on CENTCOM, INDOPACOM, and the U.S. Forces Korea. We are on the cusp of standing up on December 8th, U.S. European Command and Africa Command's service components. So we're very excited for that stand up. And there are others in the chute. We're waiting for formal letters of request from the combatant commands, but we see that continuing to grow and will in the out years continue to accelerate the stand up of others. But the importance of all of those, and particularly as we talk about EUCOM and INDOPACOM, INDOPACOM is our pacing threat and EUCOM is the acute threat, having those components there to talk about those space adversaries, potential adversaries, and how we would work with the combatant command within their timing and tempo, how we would force present, what capabilities and command and control relationships need to be made. That's all critical. So you need to live and breathe and be side by side with your combatant commander. I mean, you and I did this growing up as directors of Space Forces as part of the Air Force, but it now makes sense that we are a service. We need our own service components, like all the other services, to present, to be able to fight and win as a joint force.
Yeah, it's better to have a structure in the joint force that they recognize and they're used to working with than it is to be different. And I think that's a big part of this. So obviously we need this. I think it's a good effort, but you know, the idea though is that we avoid any war in space, you know, to the greatest extent possible. Along those lines, what are we doing to promote responsible behavior in space, creating norms, things like that?
Now, that's a great question. This United States Space Force is part of a bigger whole of government approach. I think you understand this is not going to be something the Space Force does alone, but it is an important aspect of being part of creating those norms of behavior. This started our journey in 2021. I think you remember that the SecDef, Secretary Austin, put forward our DoD tenets of responsible space operations. That was basically us codifying how you and I have operated satellites for decades, and what we saw is our norms within the department. That was then codified and reinforced in 2022 with the Vice President. Vice President Harris was at Vandenberg and announced that we would not do or condone kinetic ASAT testing. And so that became an international norm as well, is that we will talk about here shortly. The third piece is being now this next piece of government that is really important as we move forward in this is Department of State and their strategic framework for space diplomacy. So you've seen the department define what its norms are. You've seen the vice president at the highest levels in the executive branch say what we expect from the National Space Council. And now you've heard from State Department on how they intend to move forward in space diplomacy. So a full government unity of effort across the government. The next piece for us now is what is our role beyond just putting out those tenets of responsible operations. We have to be able to emulate those and execute those every day. So we set an example. It's also important that we work closely with our partners. So as Department of State builds those diplomatic arrangements and we start to work with other spacefaring nations, how are we working together to codify what we as in any coalition would say we expect as norms of behavior in the space domain? And one of the ways we've captured that is in our combined space operations vision for 2031. So it's a critical document to put forward that is very powerful, that says those nations all agree these are the way we see operations in 2031 as they all begin to build their capabilities and how we move forward together. So I think it's about behavior. It's about building those relationships, which the Chinese and Russians do not have. That's a key asymmetric advantage that we have. And I think as we continue to work with new partners and more people sign on to our vision or through our diplomatic efforts in the UN, what those norms of behavior are, I think that's all going to be very positive. Yeah,
good stuff. Well, I hope we can continue to set the example and others follow our lead there. Switching gears a little bit, coming up on the 4th birthday, unbelievably, of the Space Force. There's been an age-old issue out there, at least in my time in this space enterprise, of trying to get acquisitions and operations folks to get on the same page so that we can move faster and develop more space capability. I'm wondering, is the Space Force evolving any manner to help along that integration of ops and acquisitions?
No, absolutely. That's been a focus for the CSO here since he took the seat of how do we get to unified mission readiness? So how do you put all of the levers for readiness under a singular commander? And so there are two types of capabilities we're talking about of unified mission readiness. One is the actual readiness, and the second is the capabilities development. And how do you get those aligned around a particular mission set so that you build depth and you have two places, the readiness, the ops of it, and the systems development of it, capability development, that are talking to each other and we know exactly who to reach to and work with. So one of the things we're doing is prototyping a new structure called two different structures around the electronic warfare and the precision navigation and timing missions. And you might say, hey, Spice, why'd you pick those two? Precision navigation and timing was picked for an employed in place mission to take a look at the readiness responsibilities, weapon system infrastructure, critical facilities. There's different things that will impact an employed in place mission as compared to our space electronic warfare mission, which is much more obviously deployable and will have different challenges from a weapon system sustainment. And when it goes out into austere environments, how's it going to operate? So they both have kind of different needs and challenges that need to be addressed a little bit differently. So the pilot will address those two missions. There'll be two structures identified in that mission. One is the integrated mission delta. So all the things that you need for readiness, sustainment, the cyber, the intelligence, and the operations for PNT or space electronic warfare will be under a singular commander, executing that with all the authorities and responsibilities and accountability for that singular mission focus. The other one is the systems delta for either precision navigation and timing or for space electronic warfare. And again, now you have all of the acquisition arm building the future capabilities and what is being delivered to that operational delta. How do you put all of the acquisition element for the future of what we need and any kind of innovations that can be done to the system? So I think those two will help us move forward in a very in-depth way in each of our mission systems and mission areas to get after the detail, the readiness levers, and the ability to impact with money under singular commanders of unity of effort and unity of command. We've never had that, as you know, as you and I have grown up, those have been split. It's really been about relationships and trying to make things work out. This now puts all the accountability and responsibility under two distinct singular commanders, one for the operation day-to-day for the integrated mission delta and one for that systems delta. So I think both are great movements forward. We have the reason, you might say, well, hey, how did you even think of this idea or how did you talk about it? We've seen mission areas where this has worked. One being up on Maui with the 15th Space Surveillance Squadron. As you know, AFRL sits there side by side with the operational Space Force unit. And we've just seen them bring on amazing space domain awareness capabilities with the folks doing development and acquisition, sitting with the operator and looking at pain points and what the operator needs. So again, in that integrated mission delta, putting the sustainment folks living with the folks operating the system, they will be more responsive and see the issues every day of what the operators are dealing with to quickly make innovative designs. And as we move to a more enterprise ground structure where we can do some DevSecOps and actually change software more rapidly, I think that sustainment and ops compatibility working together is going to help us turn even faster.
And when do these pilots kick off?
They kicked off 1 October. So I think the official Delta stood up, I want to say one stood up 10 October due to our concerns with where we were with budget and what we would do. I think 10 October was one. And I think Space Electronic Warfare was already established because Colonel Petrucci was already in the seat and designated as the commander. So I think they're both stood up. We're looking at about a 6-month mark to come back and do some lessons learned and some assessment, and then have a discussion with General Saltzman on how we bring this across the enterprise, or is there a next tranche of these we would do? It will really depend on the results.
Okay, well, that's exciting. That's good. I hope it works out. I think those are the right missions to look at and pick. I've heard this term come out recently, Space 4 Gen.
Yes, sir.
Space Force Generation Model. What is that, and how's that going to make us better as a service and as warfighters? So you recall, as we were younger, everything when we were on a crew or in a squadron, a mission squadron, we were wholly committed to mission all the time. I can remember taking training days on off days, or we would rotate who could be off crew to do some training if we had to do our monthly recurring training. But that was all part of the crew schedule. There was never really any dedicated time for advanced training or working against a thinking adversary or getting after the threat and what could be the future. I think now we've recognized we've gone from a benign domain to a warfighting domain. You have to make the time for that level. It's also about force presentation, as we talked about with as a service and presenting to U.S. Space Command as well as to the other combatant commands. What am I committing and putting forward to the command to operate and do their missions versus what am I service retaining to be able to do that advanced training and tactics development and the things that we need to do to move our service forward. So in this Space 4 Gen model, it's a 3-turn model. You have a ready phase, prepare phase is the beginning, which is think when you would take leave, you go to courses, there's things that you need to do, basic unit operations, day-to-day care and feeding.
Into the ready phase, now I'm doing advanced training, think space flags, the Sky series, any of my internal unit or tier 1 level exercises working with my COCOM would happen in the ready phase. And then when they go in, they are force presented to the combatant command that they are working for. And that's all they are doing. They're not being pulled away to other things. That is their focus. We're working through, we would like for the commit phase to be twice the length of the ready and prepare phase combined. And we're working through crew structure, how we get to an 8-crew model to do that. Note that those crews include space, cyber, and intel professionals, as well as mission support and mission planning cell functions. So they're training in their separate specialty codes in that prepare and ready phase. In the ready phase, they start to come together as a crew across all of those disciplines. And then in commit, they're all force presented to the combatant commander to do that mission. So I think with the integrated mission delta structure we just talked about of bringing all of those together under a singular commander for a mission area, and now with the SPAY4Gen model of how we're going to commit and service retain to get after that advanced training mechanisms and exercises, I think both of those combined are going to really help us accelerate our readiness posture for great power competition.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the two of those together, Space Force is certainly focused on warfighting, and that, to me, that's great. You know, that's what SFA is here for too, is to help us in that regard. And so it's a great focus. And so I'm really proud of our Space Force for that. Switching gears again. So last April, I understand General Saltzman released a cyber-enabled space operations strategic guidance. That's a mouthful. But one of the objectives in that apparently is expediting integrated operations, again, along this warfighting theme. What progress is being made in your mind to better integrate cyber into space operations?
Well, I think you saw both from the integrated mission delta discussion as well as from SPAY4Gen, cyber is critical to our mission. I like to say, you know, we sometimes equate it to gas, but that isn't even a really good scenario for space with the cyber relationship that we have. It's critical to our mission set. We cannot do it at all. It's like I've run out of gas on the entire base. There is nothing. There's none on the tankers and there's none on the ground. There's zero. One of the slogans I like to say is no space heroes without ones and zeros. And so it's critical that we have those cyber operators embedded with the space crew doing the mission. They understand the mission they are protecting and defending. They understand the key cyber terrain that feeds that weapon system. And we're censoring that weapon system so that they can detect those things and quickly report them to the ops crew, and that they can also then shunt those attacks or keep them away as need be. They also act as the first line of defense when we start to talk with U.S. Cyber Command of if we are having intrusions or if we're having problems. These would be the folks that would be giving those first forensics and offering that assistance to Cyber Command. But they have to be integrated to the crew, understand the mission they are protecting, and be fully synchronized with that. And that's what the strategy laid out of how do we train and get our Guardians ready, our Cyber Guardians ready, and then put them on the weapon systems and give them the capabilities that they need.
That sounds great. I'm sorry, I'm having a computer issue here that I had to fix. There's no space heroes without ones and zeros. I love that. So we need some heroes, I think, too. I've learned this in industry over the past few years, some heroes in being able to integrate cyber defense and cyber operations in our legacy systems. I think that is a real challenge. What are we doing in that regard?
I think we're trying to censor what we can. As I mentioned, we can't have stovepiped capabilities. We need something that gets an enterprise view of our cyber defense. So we're trying to censor and bring together in enterprise tools for our cyber guardians to be able not only to look at their particular weapon system, but then from a Delta 6 perspective, can I look at the entire enterprise and see if I'm getting attacked in multiple threat vectors or only in one? So we're trying to build out that architecture for that enterprise solution. We have to look at all three segments when we talk about cyber defense. I think sometimes we get very fixated on the ground, but we have to get the space links fortified as well, and the satellite itself, as well as the receiver equipment that the users are using on the other end. How are all those cyber hardened, or we are at least aware when they're being attacked, and then how we work through them. And lastly, I would say the one thing that industry can bring us is the ability to not only just create the sensors and to pull it together as an enterprise, but also how do we make our systems more resilient by being software based, from crypto to the satellite to the ground system to the receiver. How do we get to more software based capabilities so we can turn inside the enemy and make those updates if we get cyber attacked, that we can quickly shore up an issue and change the software or the crypto if it were hacked, for example. How do we do that? And I think that builds into our resiliency. So not only having the sensors and the guys on the loop and on the system defending, but how do I create a system I can quickly modify and upgrade to respond when those threats happen?
Oh, that's good stuff. You know, this question's a bit more specific, but as old SBIRs and DSP operators, both of us, I was excited to see that the JTAG's mission transferred over on 1 October. What's the significance and the benefits of that? You know, the Army giving us the JTAG system.
No, it's a great opportunity. The Army has been great partners over the years, as you and I know, from sitting at the 460th and working with them over the years. But what this really does is put the majority of our missile warning, missile track capability into Delta 4 to do these missions. And it also helps that, you know, again, JTAGS has been using the same SBIRS capabilities, taking data from the same SBIRS satellites. But again, when you had two services and trying to synchronize acquisitions and software updates and modernization plans, you know, that it's a lot simpler when that's all in one service by being in two. Again, not to say the Army weren't great partners, but it's just the realities of the bureaucracies and how you push those things through the system and fund them. So this will be great in that it's all the majority of the capabilities are within a singular service. I want to be clear though, when we talk about this is a 1-for-1 swap. So we are absolutely just taking off soldiers, adding Guardians. It is a 1-for-1. There's no plus up in the footprint that's in any of our locations. So overseas, we have 4 locations, Japan, Korea, Qatar, and Italy. And all of those locations, again, will now have Guardians instead of the soldiers or civilians, Army civilians now versus DAF civilians that will be in those positions, but the same human footprint doing the mission. They will just now be Guardians rather than soldiers. But a great mission set, and as you said, I think it streamlines it. It also helps us really focus on getting after the threat and how we're going to continue to upgrade and modernize our systems together.
Well, since we're talking about the Army and working with other services, are we going to continue to see inter-service personnel transfers? Is that still going on? Absolutely. For FY24, we're awaiting a budget, but what's been put in the budget or proposed, again, waiting approval, is 9,400 uniform Guardians is what we were given. That's an 800 Guardian plus up from last year. So 700 of those will be Air Force IST opportunities, and 100 of them will be for the Army ISTs. Again, part of that JTAGS transfer. Are there any of the Army operators who work JTAGS that would like to come to the Space Force? So that's the makeup of the ISTs that are coming. I think we foresee the service has had growth, moderate growth since we stood up 3 years ago. I think you'll continue to see moderate growth, but it's really unclear of what that will be. But I think we can assume if we get new weapon systems or new capability, that's got to come with some type of manpower plus up. So we'll see how the future progresses, but we are looking forward to the 800 ISTs we will get here this coming fiscal year if the budget is approved. But, you know, I always get some pushback when we talk about numbers because people say, oh, you're just too small. And I think it's actually, in some cases, we see it as very much an advantage. And it's an advantage when we start to talk about talent management because we're down working with individual Guardians and we're hand placing them in the right places. So we get the most out of the Guardian and their talents. And I think they feel more valued to the system with that individual talent management. We also know recruiting is different. We can be very selective because we have more people applying than we can accept. So we're able to be very particular about what type of talent and who we're bringing to the system. And lastly, for service, it's really, you see it in the Marine Corps where colonels are pretty empowered to speak and operate well above their weight class with, you know, at the table with general officers and others. And we're doing that every day here in the building and in other places with the Space Force. And I would tell you, I think the colonels feel very empowered and a lot of job satisfaction because they do get the ability
to be at the table, and they are key to the senior decision leader team because they're doing the heavy lifting. I mean, there's only 21 GOs, so the colonels and the lower levels are hitting well above their weight class, and by the way, crushing it. So I think it's a great place to be, great place to work, and it keeps us moving and younger and thinking innovatively rather than if we were a big bureaucratic system and would be slowed down with all the people that get to say no.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, it's
it's
a,
a
you know, it's
balance.
a catch-22. Everybody wants, you can use more help. You always think that you need more people, but there's something to be said. I mean, the Marine Corps has been very successful with their model for well over 200 years. And so I hear what you're saying. So along the lines of the mother of all softball questions, but important nonetheless, I see you're wearing a new service dress. And so there'll be people who are interested, how are you liking it?
Oh,
I mean,
I love it.
Is it good?
Oh, I love it. I'm very proud to wear it. I think a lot of people don't recognize, and I didn't know this until standing up a service. As you know, we haven't stood up a service for 70 plus years. The last was the Air Force. And as you think about when the Army Air Corps left the Air Force, it took them 10 years to get to their own uniform. So it takes time. I want you to imagine the Space Force stands up in December of 2019, and then sadly COVID hits. So the whole process of designing and building a uniform is a human interaction and getting people to wear it and being able to measure sizes and things and get it fitted out. So I applaud the uniform team for this is the second go around of uniform wear testing. It was crowdsourced. We took a lot of feedback on various designs. General Raymond worked hard as the previous CSO on that, and General Saltzman has continued that with this now second wear test that will go through the end of the year. With a larger group of Guardians wearing it. So I think we're honing in and closing in on the design. I think it looks very distinctive. It sets us apart. When we walk into a room, we definitely look different. It was really, I was very proud to be an Air Force officer and wear that uniform for 28 years. But when we just started adding like pins and things to it, it was very hard to be distinctive of, are you an airman or are you a Guardian for the public. And so now I think it's very distinctive. I walk out of my apartment today in this outfit and I definitely get asked and I get noticed. And so it helps us continue to work with the public and the American people to understand you do have a new service and it helps us to have that identity and move forward. So I'm really proud to wear it. It's great. The uniform feels great. It's different. We worked really hard to have a male designer and a female designer. So the two uniforms are made differently, but when they're together, they look very good together. But I'd have to be standing next to a male counterpart to be able to point out the slight differences. The fit and the material are incredible, very breathable, wrinkle-free. We've enjoyed wearing those. I mean, everyone swears by the pants. I know we had Pantgate over the original test wear that, there was some pushback about the bagginess of the pants, but I would tell you they're the comfortablest pants. Most women, we buy pants. I find a pair of pants. I don't know if DeAnna does this. I find a pair of pants that fit that I like, and I will buy them in every color because I just like to buy pants.
Yeah.
But these are incredible, super comfortable and breathable. And I can't say any more about how excited I am to wear it because it's just great to finally be in our own uniform.
Yeah. Well, it looks sharp, and I agree. It's good to have a distinctive Space Force uniform. So instead of just making changes to the Air Force uniform, so. I'm glad you guys went that route, and it looks sharp.
Thank you.
Yeah. Looking ahead at the future, and we're coming to a close here in just a minute, a couple questions. Looking ahead of the future, what else? I mean, you've talked about all these changes in structure and how we're getting ready for warfighting and cyber and all these other things, but what's next? What's out there in the future that we have to get ready for? What challenges are coming?
Well, I think we have to continue on the journey that we're on and optimizing for great power competition. In the past, we were built with affordability, availability, centralization, efficiencies in mind. Now, as we look at the pacing challenge and our acute threat, China and Russia, I think we have to continue to keep developing and moving forward. So we can't sit on our laurels. We are the best space force in the world, but that doesn't mean you sit back and don't keep evolving and learning and growing as a service. And that's why we were frankly built to do and be prepared to fight and win if required. So as you get toward great power competition, it's an enduring competition. This is not something that's going to be look how long the Cold War went and other things throughout our history. This is an enduring element that we're going to be in, and how do we sustain that competition and stay at the right level so that we continue to defend the nation. And so a lot of that you've heard General Saltzman and the service, and we believe our theory of competitive success is competitive endurance. And how do we get after exquisite space domain awareness, removing that first mover advantage through resiliency and the ability to take a punch. But then if required, and as we should on behalf of the nation, and if directed by the National Command Authority, be able to do responsible counter space campaigning. Not
punch
only
back.
Absolutely, to get after, to punch back, to get after the pieces of how do I protect the joint force from space-enabled attack, quite frankly, and continue to protect and defend the joint space capabilities that they depend on every day. So I think those are, it's a recipe for competition. It's a recipe for success. Again, no one wants to see a war that extends into space. That's not in anyone's interest. But if required to, the service stands ready to fight and win when called upon. But I think this is a long fight. This is a long competition. It's something we're going to have to continue to keep pushing the edge in our innovation and our operators to keep thinking of how we respond and evolve with the threat.
Yeah, good. Big challenges ahead. Well,
Yes, sir.
I'm glad we've got great leaders like yourself and Salty to help get us there. So it's going to be good. One final question. This is a gratuitous plug, but I don't mind doing it. The Space Force Association has got its inaugural Space Power Conference coming up in December in Orlando. Wondering what do you think about conferences like that? Is it important? When I was General Lord's aide de camp, someone asked him if he believed in free speech, and he said, "Of course I do." And they said, "Well, good. Why don't you come give one?" And so I think these conferences are important for more than going and hearing speeches. But wondering if you have any thoughts about our inaugural event coming up.
No, I think it's a great event, and I want to just say thank you publicly to Space Force Association for putting it on. The more dialogue we have as a new service about what's going on in the domain, and it's not just about the Department of Defense. As you know, it's about industry, it's about our international partners. Everyone gets together and comes to these conferences. And so it is about relationships. It's about how do we talk about what our pain points are, the things we each have. Again, commercial may have very different perspectives on where they are and what technologies they are building, and the department will have different perspectives on what we would like to be developed or where we think we have gaps and how do we move forward. But you learn that through interaction with each other. You can't do all of that virtually or on email. Personal relationships matter. So I think these conferences are important to get people just away from the office and thinking about the future and thinking about our relationships and how we move out. I'm excited General Saltzman will speak, as will General Dickinson, the U.S. Space Command Commander. So I think you're going to have all the right leaders there, as well as our industry partners, and hopefully some key coalition partners will also be able to make the trip. And I think it's just going to be a great opportunity to get the team together and to learn. And for young Guardians, it's actually for them to see, a bigger picture than maybe just the mission that they're in, and to recognize what's happening out in the commercial industry and the things, opportunities for capabilities that they could be working with in the future. So it's, to me, overall a great event, and I'd really look forward to being there in December.
Well,
and it doesn't hurt.
No, it does not. Good. Our CEO hippie chose wisely, but yeah, well, good. Thank you for that. But, also thank you for this time. Great interview. A lot has happened both, in your career. You've moved since we last spoke, but my goodness, so much has happened in the Space Force, and really you kind of gave us the A to Z on all of that. And so really impressive information and really a great interview. So thank you so much for taking the time, General Burt, to do this.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate your time, your leadership and mentorship over the years, and for SFA's leadership and continuing to press forward on the space mission and advocating for it, because it's definitely needed. So I appreciate you guys. Thanks for the time.
All right. Thanks.
There are 8 billion humans on Earth. The Space Force Association is bringing over 2,000 of them together, all with the common goal of preserving and protecting our thriving space domain. The most critical space power challenges will be addressed. This is your invitation to be part of the solution. Attend the Space Power Conference and help secure our nation's legacy in the stars.